Hello, and welcome back to Ask a Newsworker. If you were following the news lately, around the time of my recording this video, which is late June 2023, you were probably seeing the story about the submersible device, machine, whatever you want to call it, that went down to near the wreck of the Titanic in the Atlantic Ocean, containing a number of people that sadly got crushed by the pressures of the ocean. From what I understand, everyone on board died in the accident, in the incident. It's very sad, very unfortunate. A lot of people were following the story from the very beginning, hoping that the people involved would be rescued somehow, and unfortunately they were not. My condolences to everyone involved, family, friends, anyone personally connected to that situation. A lot of people, in observing this news event, were asking questions online. I saw a lot of chatter, a lot of talk online about, while the story is certainly interesting and concerning, at least when it was happening, and of course it still is even in reflection, there were a lot of people online saying things like, with all due respect, why are we following the story of this tiny submersible with wealthy people on board when there's a lot of other things going on in the world? You'll hear people say that a lot. When something is getting a lot of news coverage, in particular, generally there'll be a certain refrain or a certain statement or a certain feeling that's out there, especially on social media, that says, why are we focusing so much on this and not on other things? Some people pointed out that there was a shipwreck in the Mediterranean Sea not too long before the submersible story, in which hundreds of people, I believe, perished, many of whom were quite poor and desperate. That didn't get nearly as much coverage, from what I could tell, as the submersible story. And a lot of people fairly ask, well, why does the news focus so much on one thing and not on other things when there's so much going on in the world at any given point? And it's a very big question. I think it's a very important question. I think it's something that the news business should frankly address more often. What I will say, based on my own experiences, based on my own time as a news worker, is that primarily, generally speaking, the news pursues drama. The news business in general is looking for stuff that's dramatic. Drama is what drives a lot of news coverage. If something is dramatic, catches people's eye, captures the public's attention or the news business's attention, that is generally what will get a lot of coverage, if not most coverage. And that bothers people, and I understand why, because a lot of people will say, well, sometimes the most dramatic things aren't necessarily the most important things. There's a lot of important things that might not be as dramatic on camera or might not have the same appeal from a dramatic sense, but they still deserve coverage. And I agree with that sentiment. But unfortunately, I'm here to tell you that the news business in general chases drama. What is important will depend on the individual, on the group. There's many things that are important to some people that are not as important to other people. I could totally understand why someone who, say, had a friend or relative or someone they were connected to on, say, the boat in the Mediterranean, I can understand why they would care more about that story than the people who were in the submersible near the Titanic. I can also understand the opposite. If you had a direct connection to the people in the submersible, you might care more about that than the boat or other stories, the boat in the Mediterranean. Generally speaking, though, the news is after drama. And in the case of the submersible story, it involved the Titanic shipwreck, which is one of the most famous shipwrecks in the world in recent history, at least in the English-speaking world. I don't know how other parts of the world interpret it, but in the English-speaking world, there is a lot of interest in that. There was a famous movie made by James Cameron back in the late 90s, early 2000s. Can't exactly remember when. So there were a lot of elements, or a lot of dramatic elements to that story in particular that led to a lot of coverage. And there's also another thing going on that I'll get into in a separate video, is that once some news outlets, especially bigger news outlets like, say, the BBC in English, once they start giving something attention, then a lot of other outlets are likely to join in, which creates a certain frenzy. And I will do a separate video on news frenzies, because that's a specific topic that I'll get into somewhere else. I just want to keep this one short. So why does some stuff get a lot more coverage than other stuff? Probably because it's dramatic. That's really it. The news is trying to, in many cases, make a show. A news show is still a show. And the news editors, especially televised news, they are very conscious of that, and they want to put on a good show. I will actually credit Neil Postman, an American author and academic that I've read many times. He was the one who first alerted me to that the news shows are still a show, and you got to put on a good show, as bizarre and as even morbid as that might sound when it's involving human lives. What do you think? Do you think this is right? Do you think this is wrong? Should the news be focused so much on drama? Should the news be looking to other stories that maybe are not as immediately dramatic but are just as important? Let me know in the comments. Send me an email. And thank you once again for watching Ask a Newsworker.